I knew Jacob Trent had it out for me from the moment he stepped into my office that first Monday morning. He wore this overpowering cologne that could have stripped paint off the walls, paired with a forced salesman's grin that never once reached his eyes. You know the type, the kind who calls himself a closer, but couldn't close a cereal box without permission from 3 layers of middle management. But I didn't care. I'd spent the past 15 years cultivating the $500 million partnership we had with Wexler International, the single account that kept half our company employed, and the other half busy pretending they were. I'd sat through blizzards to make QBRs, skipped anniversaries to handle 2 a.m. logistics fires, and knew every Wexler exec's birthday, preferred bourbon, and kids' Little League stats by heart. That account wasn't just in my portfolio. It was my entire damn desk, and I was excellent at keeping it there. The problem? Jacob didn't like that. In his mind, my long-standing relationship with Wexler was a threat to his fragile authority. He'd been brought in 6 months ago with a vague mandate to modernize operations, which is corporate code for cut costs, shuffle titles, and create a bunch of pointless slides about synergy. He never directly challenged me at first. Just little moves. A passive-aggressive tone when Wexler's CEO, Alan Wexler himself, greeted me by name before him. A raised eyebrow when their CFO chuckled at one of my quips. You could see it gnawing at him. Outwardly, things were fine. We were meeting milestones, cleaning up backlog issues, and even negotiating expansion into the Midwest region with Wexler's greenlight. But under the surface, Jacob was circling like a shark with a grudge. He'd accidentally leave me off emails, then pretend it was an oversight. He'd show up uninvited to my video calls with Wexler execs and hijack the conversation to push some new innovation framework no one asked for. I'd spend half the meeting repairing trust, steering things back to earth after his fantasy pitches about blockchain-enhanced supply nodes and other jargon he clearly didn't understand. By late summer, the tension was thick enough to spread on toast. The Q3 review with Wexler was approaching, the big one, the one that determined budget renewals and performance bonuses for half the senior staff. I'd spent weeks prepping, accurate numbers, revised forecasts, risk mitigation plans. The works. Jacob? He spent most of his time in strategy sinks that somehow always ended right before happy hour. I figured, naively, that he'd at least review my presentation deck before the meeting. Instead, that morning, he sauntered into my office, smug, confident, holding a travel mug that read, Boss Level. "Got your slides, Natalie?" he asked, already turning toward the elevator. "I'm going to lead the presentation. You can jump in, if there's time." No discussion, no courtesy, just a declaration. Like he'd been slaving over these numbers for months instead of playing corporate ping-pong all quarter. I should have fought him on it, but I didn't, because I knew Wexler's team. They trusted me. If Jacob wanted to crash and burn, I'd let him light the match himself. Maybe, just maybe, that would finally expose where the real value in this partnership came from. When we walked into Wexler's Manhattan boardroom, the sunlight was pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Alan Wexler sat at the head of the table, composed, unreadable. His VP of Ops, Lila, and the CFO, Grant, nodded at me with the familiarity that comes from a decade of trust. Jacob saw it too. I could feel his jaw tighten beside me. And then, with the confidence of a man holding someone else's resume, he launched into the pitch. It took Jacob exactly 7 minutes to start butchering my data. He glossed over nuanced projections I'd spent hours refining, rounded optimistic numbers up even further, and painted our fulfillment rates as flawless. Despite the fact we'd been operating at 93.8% and still recovering from a vendor backlog in Arizona. I tried to gently interject. Nothing aggressive, just light clarification to keep us honest. But Jacob waved me off mid-sentence like I was an intern with a question about the printer. You could feel it in the room. That moment when everyone silently registers that something's off. Grant, the CFO, tilted his head ever so slightly. Lila stopped tapping her pen. And Alan? Alan Wexler just watched. Calm, unmoving, the way a chess master watches an amateur knock over their own rook. I wanted to scream, not because Jacob was embarrassing me, though he was, but because he was putting a $500 million relationship at risk. And Wexler's people? They weren't the kind who forgot. They cataloged moments like this, stored them away, waited for the right time to act. That thought hit me like ice water. So I leaned back in my chair. Let him talk. Let him keep digging. If I was reading Alan's expression correctly, Jacob had just made his first, and likely last, overdraft on an account you do not play games with. He clicked to the next slide, my slide, and started explaining our Q3 projections like he'd spent even 5 minutes building them. He hadn't. His voice carried false confidence as he cherry-picked the most favorable trends and ignored the warnings I'd flagged. With the current uptick in logistics efficiency, Jacob said, grinning at the graph, we're on track to beat expectations by 12%. The actual forecast was a modest 6.3% over baseline. Conservative, realistic, and backed by 3 months of trend data. I opened my mouth to correct him. He held up a hand. We'll take questions after the run-through. There it was. That tone. The one I'd heard before in meetings where people wanted to sound in charge without actually knowing what they were talking about. Lila's eyebrow arched. Grant jotted something down without looking up. And Alan, still calm, still quiet, drew a single line across his notepad. Just one stroke of the pen. Deliberate, like he was marking a timestamp. Inside, I was boiling. But outside, I kept my expression composed. In rooms like this, emotion is currency, and the wrong investment costs everything. Clients smell tension, like sharks smell blood, and Greg had already cut himself. Then came the twist. Jacob began implying, subtly at first, that the problems he was now solving were inherited. No names, but the insinuation was loud and clear. He painted a picture of a broken legacy system, outdated processes, misaligned objectives, all of which he just happened to step in and fix. Except he hadn't fixed anything. I had, or at least I'd been holding it all together long enough for him to waltz in and try to take credit. I could feel Lila's eyes slide toward me, waiting to see if I'd bite. I didn't. Instead, I turned my attention directly to Alan Wexler. Calm, steady. The forecast I prepared includes adjustments for last quarter's vendor delays, I said. We've also accounted for the seasonal dip in throughput. Current gains remain consistent within the expected variance. No attack, no tension, just facts. Jacob gave a performative chuckle. Natalie's always been cautious. I'm just bringing a little optimism to the table. And the room shifted again. Barely, but enough. That kind of comment doesn't land well when billions ride on accuracy. Optimism doesn't win trust. Numbers do. By the time we wrapped, Jacob was practically glowing. He thanked everyone like he'd just nailed a TED Talk, closed the laptop, and turned to Wexler's entire board. Then he said the words that hit harder than anything in my career. One last note, Jacob said, flashing a rehearsed smile at the Wexler executives. Natalie's position is being restructured effective immediately. She won't be your point of contact moving forward. Silence. Not the polite kind. The kind that lands with the weight of a car crash. For half a second, I honestly thought I'd misheard him. Maybe he fumbled his words? But no. The smug tilt of his chin said it all. He meant every syllable. He'd just fired me in front of Wexler's board, in their own boardroom, in the middle of our biggest quarterly review. Like I was a seasonal contractor, not the person who'd carried this account through 3 CEOs, 2 market crashes, and a dozen crises that nearly derailed supply chains coast to coast. I didn't look at him, didn't give him the satisfaction of a reaction. Instead, I turned toward Alan Wexler, who sat still, hands folded, his face unreadable but far from indifferent. It wasn't pity, it was observation, analysis, like a chess master watching the board reset mid-game. Slowly, I gathered my things, each movement precise. "Thank you for your time," I said to the room, voice calm, eyes steady. Not one person replied, because in that moment, nobody knew whose side they were supposed to be on. As I stepped out of the boardroom, something shifted in the air. My career with the company? Maybe over, but my role in Wexler's world? Not even close. Jacob had mistaken theatrics for power. But in this industry, reputation is the real currency. And he'd just burned mine in the most public venue possible, without realizing that he might have set his own career on fire in the process. The humiliation burned hot under my skin, but I held it down, held it tight, because there was something else beneath it, something sharper, resolve. Downstairs, the building's longtime security guard, Curtis, blinked in surprise as I handed over my badge. "They really letting you go?" he asked, voice low. "Looks that way," I replied with a half smile. "Guess I'm free for lunch now." In my car, I sat for a long moment before turning the key. The whole meeting replayed itself in my head like a movie I hadn't wanted tickets to. Every fake smile, every deliberate lie, every glance from Alan Wexler, especially that last one. There'd been something in his eyes. Not anger, not surprise, recognition. Like he was watching someone fold a dangerous piece of information into their back pocket. Back at my apartment, I paced like a tiger in a too-small cage. Thai takeout sat untouched on the counter. A glass of wine went warm without a sip. I checked my phone every 5 minutes. HR? Silence. The company? Nothing. Jacob? I didn't expect a word, not unless he wanted to twist the knife one more time. Then the phone rang. I almost didn't answer, but I did. "Natalie," a deep, even voice said. "This is Alan Wexler." My knees buckled, and I dropped onto the couch like gravity had tripled. "Mr. Wexler?" I said carefully, trying not to sound like my pulse had just exploded. "I wasn't expecting—" "I'll get straight to the point," he said in the exact tone I'd heard him use to negotiate 8-figure mergers. "I need someone to lead our vendor strategy team, starting immediately." My mind scrambled to catch up. Was this a job offer? A referral? "Yes," he said, as if reading my silence. "You know our processes, our standards, our history. I don't have time to bring someone new up to speed." I understand," I said, gripping the phone tighter. "And your first assignment," he continued, "is to conduct a full compliance audit on our primary vendors, including," he added with a pause heavy enough to crack concrete, "your former employer." The air in my apartment shifted, as if reality had tilted and gravity had realigned in my favor. "A full audit?" I asked, carefully. "Yes," Wexler replied, his voice smooth but firm. "No diplomacy, no sugarcoating. If there are breaches, we handle them. If they've violated terms, we terminate the contract." He didn't need to say the rest. This wasn't just a job. It was a loaded weapon, and he had just handed it to me, with the safety off. "I understand," I said, my voice steady now, grounded. "I saw what happened today," Wexler continued. "I don't tolerate games in my boardroom. You carried this account for 15 years. I trust you'll handle this cleanly." We ended the call. I sat for a moment, phone still in hand, heart thudding slow and deep like distant thunder. The humiliation from hours earlier hadn't vanished, but it had transformed. It wasn't shame anymore. It was fuel. Jacob had thought he'd exiled me, but he'd just handed me a front row seat with a scalpel and a flashlight. The next morning, I walked through the doors of Wexler International, not as a supplier, not as a contractor, but as their new director of strategic accounts. My visitor badge? Gone. My new ID? Embedded with full access. Dalton's legal team had already cleared a private conference room, or, as they now called it, the war room. At the center sat a long glass table, stacked with binders, compliance audits, invoices, signed contracts, and performance reports. And at the head of the table, Lisa Cho, General Counsel, sharp, fast, and allergic to fluff. Beside her, Marcus Dell, head of finance, an ex-banker who could sniff out fraud from 100 feet away with one eye closed. Lisa didn't waste time. "We'll begin with the Master Services Agreement," she said, sliding a thick binder toward me. "We need to verify if your former employer has honored every deliverable, every clause, every SLA. I opened the binder and smiled. I knew it by heart, because for over a decade, I'd lived and breathed every detail of that contract. I'd written half the SOPs that kept it operational. But now I wasn't defending it. I was dissecting it. It didn't take long to find the first crack. Delivery windows labeled on time that were actually 2, sometimes 3 days late. Whitewashed in internal memos. Penalty clauses ignored. KPI thresholds quietly reinterpreted quarter after quarter. I highlighted each one and cross-referenced the clauses they violated. Marcus leaned forward. "These missed deadlines," he said, voice low. "How did they explain them?" "Logistical bottlenecks," I replied, flipping to a section I knew would make his jaw tighten. But they still invoiced at full rate, even when running at 70% staffing capacity. "Which violates Section 4.3, Lisa said, already highlighting it. "Billing for incomplete service." By lunchtime, we had uncovered overbilling under the guise of expedited processing, consecutive underperformance with no penalties applied, undisclosed subcontractor swaps, a direct violation of the transparency clause, a buried clause that required prior written consent for outsourcing, which had clearly never been granted. Each violation was small on its own. Together, they told a story, a damning one. Jacob hadn't just mismanaged the account. He'd either been blind to these failures, or he'd ignored them entirely. Lisa sat back in her chair, arms crossed. "If this is accurate, and I believe it is, we've got grounds for termination without liability, possibly damages." "That's the objective," I said, my tone level even as something cold and precise settled inside my chest. 2 procurement managers from Wexler's side looked uneasy, maybe because they'd been working too closely with Jacob's team. Their hesitation in forwarding emails and files didn't go unnoticed. Allies and enemies don't wear badges in this business. Sometimes, the only way to know who's who is to hand them a match and see what they burn. By late afternoon, Lisa slid a thin manila folder across the war room table. "This is the last piece," she said. "Breach clause confirmations. Once these are verified, we finalize the termination." I opened the folder like it contained surgical tools, because in a way, it did. Legal instruments, sharp and exact, ready to sever ties without leaving a scar. That night, I brewed a pot of coffee strong enough to melt steel and sat at my kitchen table until nearly midnight. Every clause, every violation, every timestamp was double-checked and cross-referenced. Each page I turned felt heavier than the last, not from doubt, but from clarity. By the time I closed my laptop, the autopsy was complete. No speculation, no gray zones. just hard numbers and contractual facts, like a bullet list with no way to dodge. Jacob had humiliated me. Now, I was about to erase him from the only account keeping his career afloat. The next morning, the war room was silent when I entered. The kind of silence that means everything is ready. The table was a battlefield of evidence. Neatly labeled binders, annotated emails, audit trails, and payment records. Printouts marked with fluorescent tabs like surgical markers. Lisa tapped the final binder closed with a crisp snap. "It's airtight," she said. "They're in breach. Beyond repair. No arbitration. No cure period." Marcus crossed his arms, expression grim. "This will hit their Q4 like a bat to glass. They're not prepared for the fallout." Lisa looked at me. Her voice was cool. But her eyes? Sharp. "Do you want to deliver it?" There wasn't a second of hesitation. "Yes," I said. "He did this publicly. I'll return the favor. Precisely." Lisa slid a printed letter across the table. It was only a few paragraphs, stamped with Wexler's official letterhead. But every line was a grenade, armed, sighted, and fatal. At the bottom, Alan Wexler's signature. Bold, clean, final. "Marcus will go with you," Lisa said. "If there's pushback, he'll handle financial terms. But make no mistake, once you hand that over, it's done. There's no walking this back." I nodded. That night, I didn't sleep. Not out of fear, not even excitement. It was anticipation, knowing what this moment meant. Jacob had staged my professional execution. Tomorrow, I'd deliver his. I laid out my outfit like I used to before multi-million-dollar negotiations. Neutral colors, tailored but not flashy. No jewelry, no distractions, just precision. I even printed a second copy of the letter. For me. Just to feel its weight in my hands. The next morning, Marcus met me in Wexler's lobby. "Ready?" he asked. "More than," I said. We rode in silence to the office building where I used to work. The one I'd been fired from 2 days ago like a junior assistant. My badge was long gone. But the Wexler-issued visitor pass clipped to my blazer was unmistakable. When we stepped into the lobby, the receptionist froze for a millisecond too long, then forced a polite smile. She saw the badge. She knew exactly who I represented now. The halls were the same muted art, same faint smell of stale coffee and ambition. But everything else had shifted. Jacob's assistant, Chloe, looked up from her desk as we approached. Her eyes flicked from Marcus to me to the badge on my jacket. "Ms. Hale," she said, stumbling a little. "He's in his office." I didn't wait. I walked past her, straight down the hallway I used to own. I was done knocking. This wasn't a courtesy visit. It was an execution. Jacob was reclining in his chair, scrolling his phone, when I walked in. He didn't look up right away, probably assuming it was another analyst or some junior project manager he could brush off. Then he saw me. His expression flickered through 3 phases: confusion, recognition, then that oily smirk he wore like a uniform. "Well," he said, leaning forward with mock enthusiasm. "I didn't think you'd be back so soon. Couldn't stay away?" I didn't answer. I simply walked in, sat down across from him, and placed the letter on his desk. Smooth, deliberate. Wexler's letterhead gleamed under the overhead light like a courtroom spotlight. He looked at it, then back at me. "What's this?" he asked, sarcasm creeping into his tone. "A pitch to get your old job back? I hope it's better than your Q3 forecast." "Read it," I said. Calm, cold, not angry, just surgical. Jacob's eyes narrowed, but he picked up the letter anyway. He scanned the first paragraph, posture relaxed, still smug. Then came paragraph 2. I saw it, the subtle shift. His eyes froze on the breach citations. Real numbers, real clauses, no wriggle room. By paragraph 3, the air in the room had thickened. His hand stopped moving. He gripped the page tighter than before, his thumb whitening against the edge. Marcus, still standing beside me, didn't speak. He didn't need to. He was there as witness and reinforcement, a financial undertaker for Jacob's freshly dying account. Jacob blinked hard, then tried to fake a laugh. "This is a joke," he said. Wexler, can't just pull the plug like this." "They can," I said evenly. "And they have, effective immediately." He sat back, momentarily stunned, the hum of the ceiling vent suddenly louder than it had any right to be. I kept my face neutral. No smirk, no gloating. Nothing he could twist into a tantrum, because this wasn't revenge. It was execution by precision. He tried to recover. "You think this hurts me?" He scoffed, voice rising slightly. "I think it changes things," I replied, voice flat. Marcus placed a slim leather folder on Jacob's desk. "Financial reconciliation figures," he said. "You'll need to process these today. Wexler's systems offboarding will begin immediately." Jacob looked at him, then at me, but I was already standing. "Goodbye, Jacob." My tone was polite, almost professional, like I was ending a budget meeting, not a $500 million contract. As I turned, I heard the paper shift in his hands, pages flipping, desperate eyes scanning for a loophole that didn't exist. That smug armor he wore so proudly? Gone, replaced with silence and the weight of impending fallout. Then the door opened, and in walked David Harkins, the CFO of our company. He wasn't supposed to be there. I hadn't seen him in months, but the look on his face, that wasn't casual. He'd heard. He knew. "Greg," Harkins said sharply, using Jacob's formal name. His voice cut like a gavel. "Is that what I think it is?" Jacob said nothing, just shifted the letter on his desk so the Wexler header was visible. Harkins came closer, read the top half. His face didn't move, but the vein near his temple twitched. "Do you have any idea what losing Wexler means for our Q4? He asked, voice hardening. "That's half our projected revenue." Jacob stammered something about negotiation, but Harkins slammed that door shut. "There is no negotiation," he said. "It's final." He turned to me, nodded once. No smile, but a silent understanding. And Jacob? He just sat there, crushed beneath paper he thought he controlled. I didn't say anything more. There was nothing left to say. Jacob's fingers twitched over the letter, as if he could somehow flip past the damage, find a page where this wasn't happening. But it was, and every paragraph that followed only sealed the coffin tighter. Missed deliveries, overbilling, unauthorized subcontracting, failure to meet contractual SLAs, each one backed by signatures, timestamps, invoices. Irrefutable. This is exaggerated," he finally muttered. "You've been waiting to—" Before he could finish that sentence, David Harkins cut in, voice low, but sharp enough to cleave the room in half. "Stop talking, Jacob." Silence. "You've done enough," Harkins continued, his eyes locked on Jacob like a man watching a ship already underwater. "There is no version of this where you talk your way out." Jacob's jaw tightened. His eyes bounced between us like he was still searching for an opening, some way to spin this, to salvage power from the ruins. But he found nothing. Just facts. Just finality. I stood. My chair scraped gently against the floor, punctuating the silence in the way only steel-cold satisfaction can. I smoothed the front of my jacket, looked Jacob in the eyes. "This is effective immediately," He opened his mouth again, some last gasp of resistance, but Harkin's mitt shut it down before a single syllable escaped. "Not one more word," he said. "We'll handle the fallout." That was it. No yelling, no slamming doors, no theatrics. Just the quiet devastation of a man realizing the very account he had tried to use to destroy me had just been used to destroy him. I turned, walked out without looking back. My heels tapped the hallway tile in a steady rhythm that echoed like a slow drum roll behind me. The air outside his office felt clearer, like someone had finally cracked a window in a room that had gone stale. As I stepped into the elevator, my phone buzzed. One new message. From Alan Wexler. Subject: perfectly executed. I didn't smile. Not outwardly, but something in me finally settled. The sting of that public firing, the humiliation of being dismissed like a temp, it was gone. Not erased, but overwritten. Outside, the autumn sun lit the pavement in long gold streaks, the kind of light that feels like clarity. I didn't rush to my car, didn't look around to see who had watched me leave, because this wasn't the kind of ending that needed an audience. No grand victory speech, no fireworks, no dramatic mic drop, just a clean finish, final, on my terms.